Nuna. Good morning, everyone. We're in Perek Nuna Aleph, chapter 51 of Sefer Yeshayahu. There are two big pieces to this Perek. The first is just the opening psukim, where you hear HaKadosh Baruch Hu, or the Navi, turning to the Jewish people and basically tell them, listen and look. Pay attention to what's going around. And in fact, you'll find that verbs about listening and looking are going to be appearing in a great number within these psukim. So, for instance, you have the word hakshivu twice. You have azinu. You have shimu. You have abitu that appears three times. Su l'shamayim einechem, lift up your eyes. So all of these, the opening pieces, pay attention to what's going around, and you'll understand a little bit more. It's one of the things we're not good at. We sometimes forget to look around. The second half of the Perek, from Pasuk Tet until the end of the Perek, Pasuk Chaf Gimel, is very simply HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that we first look to HaKadosh Baruch Hu to take action, and then HaKadosh Baruch Hu turns to us and asks us to take action. All of this is referring to the potential of salvation, of Geulah. What is very interesting within these psukim, there's a number of different points. One of them is we'll see actually that Avram Avinu and Sarah Imenu are going to be mentioned. You don't find that too often in Tanakh when they're referred to in a historical context in the same way. And then you'll actually have some psukim that we're familiar with, because this is also the latter half of this parak is also a haftarah for Sefer Shoftim, so we're familiar with that as well. It'll be a lot of fun, the parak. And the parak itself begins simply with the words in Pasuk and Nuna Aleph, Pasuk Aleph. It starts out, Shimu Elai Rodfei Tzedek Mivakshei Hashem. The Navi turns to the people who are with him. In other words, listen to me, those who pursue tzedek. Now, tzedek in this sense is not just righteousness, but as Daf Mikrat points out, he says it's derech hatova, the right way. Those of you who are seeking the right way. It's not meant in a legalistic kind of context, but in a more general context itself. Listen, he turned back to those people who believe in God. Remember, at the end of the last parak, we had both groups, those who were believing, those who weren't. Now you listen to me. Habitu El Tsur Tzavtem. Look to the rock from which you were hewn. Now, the Tsur is going to be, we'll see in a moment, Avram Avinu. Ve'el Makevet Bor Nukartem. And also to the hollow of the pit from which you were dug. It's a poetic way of saying, look to your origins. The Radak says, and this, as does Rashi, this is talking about Avram Avinu is the Tzur, and the Bor is Sarah Imenu. Habitu el Avraham Avichem. And now the Navi gets very clear in it. He says, look to Avram, your father, ve'el Saram Tochalchem. And also to Sarah, who gave birth to you. This is, in essence, if you think about it a minute, the first was poetic. It was like a mashal, the tsur and the bor, and now we're getting to the nimshal, to the meaning of that poetry. Look to the two of them, ki achad krativ, vavarchehu, va'arbehu, because I called to one, and I blessed him, and I made him multiply. Now, this week is the perfect chance to be able to do it. We're coming into Parshat Lech Lecha. Last on Shabbos Mincha, we began to hear these words. The beginning of Lech Lecha, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Avram, makes the promise, you'll be great. In other words, what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying here, and this is, according to Rashi, very simply, and Radak says a similar piece as well, I picked one person. From that one person, greatness occurred. Says the Shadal that it's meant to be the same will happen with you. Why? You're coming back now. If we take this as Yeshayahu talking in the future about the Jewish people coming back from Bavel, from the first exile, remember a small number of Jews came back. Well, don't worry about the numbers. It's not an issue of numbers. God took one person and created an entire nation. God can take a small number of people coming back from Bavel, or if you want to take this as others talk about, like the Abarbanel talks about, this is talking about the future Geula, Don't worry about the numbers. It's never an issue with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu takes one and makes them grow into great amounts. Ki nicham Hashem Tzion, because God has comforted Tzion. Nicham kol charvolteha. God has comforted all of that which had been destroyed, all of its destructions. In other words, think back of Avram Avinu, of the Nimshal again. Avram and Sarah had no children. They only had children when they were, this is the Radak's position, they only had children when they were older. And nevertheless, HaKadosh Baruch Hu was able to create out of them. So too with the Jewish people. After all of the years of the Galut, all the years of the diaspora, all of the hopelessness that you may have experienced during that time, God is going to remember you. God will take you out. God will build your Charvoteh. Now, Charvoteh, Rav Schwab talks about the fact that it's not just a question of God saving the Jewish people, and it's not just a question of God saving the land of Israel, but God is also going to do a complete salvation, rebuilding everything to the extent of even rebuilding the civilization, the cities of Yerushalayim, the cities of Eretz Yisrael, and in fact, Vayasa Midbara Eden, he's going to take the wilderness and transform it into the Garden of Eden. Va'arvata Kegan Hashem, and he's going to take the Arava and make it into like the Garden of God. Sason v'simcha yimatzeva, todah v'kol zimra. You're going to have joy and happiness will be found there. Todah v'kol zimra. Thankfulness. Now, what is this Todah? The Mitzudat David says Todah. This is what they're going to be singing. Is they're going to be singing praises of thanks on all of the miracles. That the Todah v'kol zimra is the type of kol zimra they're going to be hearing, the type of rejoicing they're making. They'll recognize what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is doing. Now, it is possible, though, that the Todah here is the Korban Todah, also being offered. That at the time of the redemption, we will have a Beit HaMikdash again, and then you'll have the Korbanot of Todah, and the Kol Zimra, which the Mitzudat David says as well, could also be the songs that are going to be coming across, those songs of Torah that you're going to hear. There's a lot of different options on what this happiness is, but the reality is what God's giving a good, a good encouraging speech. Don't worry about numbers. Don't worry about how many recognize things. God can build and do what's necessary. Yeah.
It's very old unseen.
That's okay.
It says joy, melody, and it says this description is also true of the Jewish settlements in modern Palestine.
Okay, right. It makes it. Who is the wrote the commentary on that one? Who's the editor of that edition?
Reverend Dr. I.W.
Slotky. Okay, so it's no. You can find this, by the way. While it is true that most of the Meforshim talk about Yeshayahu speaking about the first redemption, the first Geulah from the Babylonian exile. Again, Leah Barbanel and others say this is also talking about the future. And you can find a lot of things that are happening in the future, or happening now, that are also reflected in this. Once more, going back on this theme, though, that this opening series of psukim is pay attention to things. Hakshivu alayami. The Navi turns to the Jewish people and he says, listen to me, my people, ulu'umi elai ha'azinu, and my nation, to me, pay attention. The difference between am and le'um, according to the Malbim, and am is the way you behave, a le'um is a shared religion. So both the polity and the people of the Jewish people. Listen to me. Ki Torah me'iti tetzeh. The Torah is going to come out from me. Umishpati or amim argia. And the justice or amim to enlighten the rest of the people will be a source of margoa. Let's say for a moment that we're going to assume it means of calm. What is this talking about? Well, according to the simplest explanation, which is the Radak says, listen, if you remember back to the beginning of Yeshayahu, we had this pasuk that we've heard of sometimes, Ki mitzion tetzei Torah dvar Hashem Yerushalayim, that we need to understand that in the future time, there is going to be Torah. Now, what's the Torah, Ki mitzion tetzei Torah? That actually, according to the Radak, at the time of the redemption, the Mashiach is going to teach the rest of the nations of the world how to work in the way of God, how to follow God's paths. That this will be following, as the Radak says, Armageddon, following the battles of Gog and Magog. According to Rashi, Rashi says, actually, when we talk about Torah, Kimitzion Tetzei Torah, that's talking about the Nevi'im. The Nevi'im, the words of the Nevi'im are going to come out at that point, and the Mishpatim, that those laws of how you operate, and the laws are going to be the kind of laws, ben adam lechavero, between people, that the sense of justice and lawfulness that's going to come from the Mashiach, that's going to come at the time of redemption, will bring peace to the world. People will start treating one another in appropriate fashions. And so you have two things. You have the Torah you have the instruction, not the Torah, but the instruction from the Nevi'im, and you're also going to have the way of the world. The Malbim talks about the Torah is religion, and the Mishpat is what we'll call civil law. Ki Torah me'iti, now what the Ibn Ezra points out, by the way, if you look here, Torah me'iti, very simply, from me and not from anyone else, the Navi is saying. And then, umishpati or amim argia, then remember, all of this is the way that we're trying to fulfill what we had back in Perek Membet, that we have an obligation to be the light unto the nations. And that's why, umishpati or amim argia, that it will enlighten the nations with mishpat. So you have a number of different pieces within this pasuk. Ultimately, what it means is, the bottom line of all of these different explanations is at the time of the Geulah, it will have an impact not just on the Jewish people, but on the world as a whole. That the example of the Torah is going to impact and change the world. Not necessarily, as the Rambam says, not necessarily in a miraculous fashion per se, but it will change the world because the world will start accepting what we'll call Jewish morality, what we'll call Jewish civilization, the way of how to behave with one another. And then he keeps on going. The Navi, he says, Karov tzidki yatsa yishi, that it is already close, this victory or this righteousness. My salvation has already gone out. Uzro'ai amin yishpotu. And my arm, my strength, will judge the nations. Elai iyimikavu, the far-off islands are going to be hoping for me. Ve'el zro'i yiyachelun. And it's going to be ultimately to my power. They're going to have that sense of tochelet or tikva, of hope as well. What's happening? He said very simply, according to the Radak, this salvation that you're hoping for can be right away. It really depends. If you pay attention, if you do what you need to do, it's there. Says the Sforno a little differently, Karov tzidkati l'chol mevakesh. It's just up to you to ask. If you remember last week, it was like, there's no place like home. If you just ask for it, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says it's close enough. Just ask and you'll get it. Now, from that same piece, the impact of all of this will be all the way, Elai iyim yikavu, all the way to those far-off lands. Iyim, the islands, always had this impression of being the ends of the earth, were the islands. If you think about the ancient world, islands were the end of the earth, and sometimes they actually thought large land masses were islands because they didn't understand the geography of the area. So it'll have that impact all the way, okay? All the way as far as you can imagine it. And then for the strength, well, what's going to be happening is that even the nations of the world are going to be praying that God will bring his strength and God will punish those who need to be punished. The difference between tikva, by the way, and yeyachelun is difference between the two different kinds of hopes. Tikva Tikva is just this hope that's out there without any specific time frame, um, without any promise. We just have hope. When it comes to Me'achel, a person who has that other form of hope, which is mentioned at the end, that's that this promise should be fulfilled in its time, that the Geulah will happen when it needs to happen. So, and this is the end of this piece. Look up to the heavens with your eyes, v'habitu el haaretz, and look at the land mitachat that's beneath you. Ki shamayim ke'ashan nimlachu, because the heavens smoke that vanish, va'aretz kabeged tivle, and the land is like garments that wear out. V'yoshva k'mochei nimutun, and those who live on it will die. Yeshuati leolam tiyem, but my salvation will be eternal. V'tzidkati lo techat, and my tzedek, my righteousness, will never be broken. That's what Mitzudat Zion says. You translate as broken. What is happening here? The Navi says, listen, I want you to understand all of these things. Look up and look down. There's nothing to be afraid of. The Mitzudat David takes this in a somewhat mystical sense, that he look up at the guardian angels of Bavel and look down at the power, the mortal power of the Babylonians, and see their strength, but don't be afraid. Because whatever you're seeing above and whatever you're seeing here in the ground, it's passing. The only thing you need to know that is eternal is God's protection, God being with you and God promising to save you. And as a result of that, the Mitzudat David continues that it means ultimately that the Babylonians will fall, and so will their angels in heaven fall as well. The Ibn Ezra takes a little bit of a different approach, and the Ibn Ezra says that this gets a little bit complicated. Okay, he does talk about the idea that what this pasuk is suggesting is the physical world is temporary, that the only thing that's permanent is the soul. And there will come a time when there will just be an existence of the souls. But he then says that bottom line is that's not the pshat of the pasuk. The pshat of the pasuk is that God, the faith in God's salvation should always be in place. It's leolam. And you should never be afraid that it'll be broken. Techat, there, by the way, remember, al tirab al techat, normally it's kind of fear. So Shadal says, don't be afraid that something's going to change. Okay, but sikati lo techat, don't be afraid. The only problem with it is lo techat, it's missing something afterwards. So the Mitzudat David said that you're thinking a terminology of broken. The second part of this parak now gets into a little bit more of where God wants action. Shimu elai yodei tzedek. And so the Navi once again says, pay attention. Pay attention. Am torati b'libam. The people who my teaching is in their hearts. Now, what is teaching of my people in their hearts? According to Radak, it's a step above those people who recognize who I am. It's those people who really get it. Remember, the heart is not just the seat of emotion, the heart is the seat of intellect in the time of Tanakh. The people who truly understand, this is not just the socially orthodox. This is the people who are truly understanding God. And that's the Am Torati B'libam. And that's the Radak's position. Okay, now, according to the Malbim, he says Yodei Tzedek is, again, he goes back to that previous dichotomy we had in the previous pasuk, where it talked about there's two different aspects. There is the religious and there's the polity. There's the religious, and let's call it the rule of law. So he says those who believe in Tzedek, those are the people who understand all of the ways things should be between man and other men. In other words, ben adam lechavero, the laws of society. Am torati b'libam, and those who believe in me. So it's the two people, those who have, let's call it the secular and the religious as one. Al tir'u cherpat enosh. Don't be afraid about the disgrace, the shame that others caused you. Umi gidu fotam, nor be afraid of their insults. Al techatu. Don't be, and again, techatu could be broken, like we had in the previous pasuk, or be afraid. Rabbi Victor Belgansi says that that while we're in the galut, that the nations of the world say, look, where's your God? You're not getting saved. You're nothing. Jewish people don't even think about it. And this is what it's talking about. Don't be afraid of those people who say those things. Ki chabeged yochlem ash. Because when it comes to these people, those Rishaim in the world, it'll be like a garment that is eaten by the moth. V'chatzemer yochlem sas. And like the wool that is eaten by that worm, which is also same kind of thing like a moth. V'tzidkati leolam tiyeh v'yeshuati ledor dorim. And my salvation will be leolam ledor dorim. The dot so from Rabinovich says an interesting piece. He said, what's the difference between olam, leolam, and dor dorim? Now, in English, my assumption is one is forever and for generations upon generations or something like that.
It's for all generations.
For all generations. He says, Leolam is a measure of time. Dor Dorim is a measure of humanity. That when I say something's going to be forever, it's forever regardless if there are people involved or not. It just exists. Dor Dorim is something that's passed from one generation to the next. So we're watching the role of people. And then he gets into, and he says, Uri livshi ozro Hashem. The Navi prays to God. This is Rashi. The Navi prays to God, and he says, God, wake up. Uri. Okay, we need you. And he says, Livshi oz zroa Hashem, says the Ibn Ezra, I want you to cloak your strength with glory. Now, it's interesting. I'm sure all of you know there's a wonderful English word that I never knew before, an epizeuxis. Are you familiar with the word epizeuxis? Epizeuxis, Epizeuxis. Epizeuxis. Oh, it'll be a great Scrabble word. And epizeuxis is the successive repetition of words. So, for example, great example out of Shakespeare and Macbeth. Okay, Macduff discovers Duncan's been murdered. Oh, horror, horror, horror. Okay, what happens in this parak, and Yeshayahu does it, is Yeshayahu goes ahead and he Uri. Now, what is it, Uri? What's happening here? We're not looking for two different kinds of awakenings, which sometimes when you have repetition, it does. What is happening, the way the Meforshim look at this is it's a strengthened Uri. Avraham. Okay, but I wanted, yes, it is. I'll spell it for you again. Huh? EPIZEUXIX. Okay, now this is one of those words, by the way, I would suggest after the shir is over, you just find a way to throw it into a conversation and confuse everybody. Huh? Well, we'll find it. We'll find your spelling. Just remember epizeuxis. Yeah. Okay. Now, Uri, she owes Zro Hashem, Uri Kime Kedem. I want you to be like you were once upon a time, God. Dorot Olamim. I want you to be like you were, says the Radak, at the time of Yetziat Mitzrayim. I want you to remember the first redemption. Dorot Olamim, it's been years since you've done this, God. So it's time, wake up. Yeah.
Of that phrase is from Pasuk Ches of Dordorim and Leolam. So
that's interesting. We'll find also in a minute, we'll see where God's response is going to be to the Uri. We're telling God, wake up. Of course, what do you think God's going to tell us? You wake up. Okay, but we'll get to that in a minute. Uri. Okay, halo at hi hamachzevet rahav mecholelet tanin. Aren't you, okay? Aren't you the Zroa Hashem, the one who smashed machzevet rahav mecholelet tanin? Now, interestingly, Rahav Tanin, and then we'll see in the next pasuk as well, where we're going to talking about the Macharevet Yam Meitahom Rabbah, okay, Amakei Yam, in Mesopotamian creation myths. Okay, they have this myth of the way the world was created. And the way the world was created was that God went and he destroyed these beasts within the seas, and from that came the earth itself. So some of the modern commentators talk about the fact that Yeshayahu is using terms that people knew. It wasn't necessarily from the classic stories. And he was using those terms that they've heard. Aren't you that all-powerful God, this is what he's saying, who created the world? That's one approach. And by the way, Tanin is a crocodile. Okay, Taninim is a crocodile. I always get confused with crocodile or alligator. It's one of those two things. But, huh? Yes, right. By the way, but it's crocodiles. Now Rashi takes a different piece. Rashi says no, because Rashi wasn't necessarily aware of Mesopotamian creation myths. It's only modern archaeology understands this. But Rashi takes the approach. What Rahav is also referred to, okay, as Bavel. If you have Rahav u Bavel in Tehillim, you have the pasuk. So he says, I'm sorry, Rahav is being Mitzrayim. So he says, Rashi says Rahav is Mitzrayim. Tanin, who is the serpent of Mitzrayim? Paro. So according to Rashi, what happens is, weren't you the one who smashed Egypt and you destroyed, you killed, or you terrified the serpent of Egypt, Paro? So you can take it one way, you can take it the other way. Ultimately, what the Navi is telling HaKadosh Baruch Hu is, you're the all-powerful one. We need that power one more time. We need to be able to be saved. Haloat, and it continues with the same thing, which I've already jumped onto. Haloat pasuk yud, you're that zroa, hiya hamacharevet yam. It's the one who dried out the sea. Now, drying out the sea, well, again, macharevet yam, if we're talking about the creation myths, and I'm going to leave it on the side, all of that is in the Mesopotamian lore, okay? But if I take it just from the more classic approach of Chazal, yeah, you're the one who dried out the sea. What did you dry out the sea? At Yam Suf. Made to home Rabbah, they were great depths of water. Mama K Yam, who, I'm sorry, Hasama Mama K Yam, who placed, okay, the depth of the sea, derech lavor gulim, a way for the redeemed to be able to walk. This is talking about Kriyat Yamsuf. God, you did it for us once. You saved us once. Okay, here's time two. Remember, when we're talking about redemption, we're talking about Gula. The paradigm of Gula is the Exodus. The second Gula was Bavel. The third Gula is the one that we anticipate. So if I want to talk about Geula, God, it's been a couple of years. Okay, this is talking about the length of time from when this is about 800-900 years later. It's been 800-900 years, God, since you pulled one off. Time to do it all over again. Ufduyei Hashem Yeshuvun. We had this pasuk already, and that's what's fascinating about it. We had it before in Perek Lamed Hey pasuk Yud, almost exact pasuk. Ufduyei Hashem Yeshuvun. Those who have been redeemed by God will return. Uvaot Zion Berinan. The Jewish people will return in joys. V'simchat olam al rosham. An eternal joy will be on them. Sasom v'simcha yasidu. Okay, v'nasu yagon v'anacha, and their depressive state, their mourning will be put aside, will be moved aside. So God, we need you. We need you. You can do it. And look what'll happen when it's all done. We're going to be really happy. Says, now just remember, Anochi, Anochi, hu menachemchem. Okay, this is the Haftorah, but Anochi, Anochi, now we now know it is a Epizeuxis. Okay, now we got a good epizeuxis. Anochi, Anochi. It says Rabbi Vigner Belgansi, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to say very clearly, listen, just God. There's nobody else who's going to do this. Okay. Anochi, Anochi, and it says this foreigner, I who had comforted you at the time of Yetziat Mitzrayim, Anochi hu menachemchem. He views it as two separate words, not as an epizeuxis, but it's Anochi. God says, it will be me. I was the one who did that, and I will do that in the future. Miat vatir'im enosh yamut. Who are you that you should be afraid from mortal man? Humanity, yamut, who dies. Umi ben adam chatzir yinaten, or from a person who will be like a blade of grass, which means will disappear. Yeah. Huh? The Knesset Yisrael, the Jewish people. Okay. It's interesting in if you look in this one pasuk, you have Menachem Chem, which is Zachar, and you have At, which is Nekeva. And this, whenever you have the Nekeva, this is the Knesset Yisrael, the assembly of the Jewish people, and we'll switch back and forth between Zachar and Nekeva because when we're referring to the totality versus the individual, often that happens as well. What's interesting, and what's the difference between a Ben Adam and Enosh? Okay, Ben Adam, that when you refer to a Ben Adam, Enosh is humanity. A Ben Adam is a person with who's fallible, who has flaws. A Ben Adam, and so we're taking both the humanity, the greatness of humanity, and then people who are imperfect. Okay, Chatzir, by the way, here it says, "Umi Ben Adam Chatzir Yinatain." The Radak just says it should be Kichatzir. It's not that they're going to be given blade of grasses, but they will be like blades of grass, something that's just temporary. Vatishkach Hashem osecha. Now let's be clear. You didn't remember. We tell God, wake up. God gets up and says, listen, I will do this. But what's been the problem? You forgot God, osecha, past, present, or future. Huh? It's really in the classic present form, okay? And based on that, Rav Schwab says, God is still forming the Jewish people. Okay, it's not an act of the past, but it is an act of all time. Vatishkach Hashem osecha. Rashi says, what does it mean to forget God? You didn't rely on God. Very simple. You have been so afraid of these mortal people. You didn't rely, you didn't go ahead. You forgot that God was the one who did everything. Osecha. In fact, the Metzudat Zion says, Osecha inyan hagdala v'arama. It's not just Osecha fashioned you or made you. It's the one who lifts you up, you forgot. Notesh shamayim v'yosed aretz. God is the one who spread out the heavens and founded the earth. V'tifached tamid kol hayom mipnei chamat hamitzik. And you have been afraid all the time of your oppressors, of the fury of your oppressors. Kasher konen lahashchit, when he's preparing to destroy. Vayeh chamat hamitzik. But where is that fury? Okay, where is that fury of the oppressors? Rashi says, you Jews have forgotten God because you've been so overwhelmed by all the things that have been happening to you. Says Rashi, machar ba veinenu. Don't worry about it. Those things are just temporary. They're going to pass by. So why have you been so afraid of it? Or as the Shadal says, listen, you're scared of the Babylonians. Soon, the Persians and the Medes are going to come along and they're going to destroy the Babylonians. There's nothing to be afraid of. The only thing that's eternal is HaKadosh Baruch Hu's promise that you're going to be saved. Mihar so eli pateach. Now, this pasuk is really complicated, okay? And I have to tell you because the words make it complicated. So in its normal translation is excrement, okay? And the simplest explanation of miher soali pateach is what Rashi says, that, okay, that these that just like these people, not only are they human, but they have to go ahead and they have digestive problems. I'm trying to keep it as clean and as nice as possible. And they need to run to be able to take care of themselves. V'lo yamut l'shachat, and according to Rashi, and if they can't do it, okay, they're going to die. V'lo yachsar lachmo, and at the same time, okay, he's always going to have to constantly be eating. Now I'm going to ask someone with an art scroll to read the translation of verse 14. Okay, you're on. The reason why, because art scroll almost always follows Rashi. I want to hear how he does it.
14. The wanderer will soon be released, and he will not die in the pit, nor will his bread be lacking.
Good. And so here it takes very clean. The art scroll chose to go with the Radak. Yeah, it is. Huh? Right. Right. So normally with an aleph, which is why the Radak says that. So I hear is tiltul v'noam makom lemakom. It's a wanderer, and he bases it on a pasuk in Yirmiyahu, v'shalachti lo tzoim v'tzeiuhu. Now, if that's the case, he says the wanderers are going to go, okay, and they're going to be able to open up the gates of the exile, and this is referring to the Jewish people. According to Rashi, first explanation is talking about the enemy. Second explanation of Rashi is so in this case is chagur, is girded with, you have your military belt on, okay, with your armaments on it, okay, and he says, you find in Samach Gimel of Yeshayahu, Tsoe Barov Koach, and therefore he is, even though your enemy is now girded to go to war, what's going to happen? Mihar Tsoe Lipateach, it's going to fall off. He's going to lose his armaments. Interestingly, the fourth one, which I understand the best, okay, is Tsoe, according to the Abarbanel, is Tsoek, your prayers. Hurry and pray is what the Navi is saying to the Jewish people. All of these are possibilities, but because there are four different ways and totally different ways to look at the pasuk, and what happens when all of these things happening, Vanochi Hashem Elokecha roga hayam. I, God, will roga hayam. Now, roga hayam, okay, let's take verse 15, your turn again. Verse 15, I, God, your God, will roars at the sea. That is Rashi. Okay, Rashi says roga comes from the word goar. It's flipping the letters, okay, to roar. The Malbim says, huh? Right. The Malbim says, no, it's from the word margoa, calm. I am the one. I am the God, and I'm going to go with the calm for a minute because you'll see how the pasuk works. I am the God who can bring. By the way, how does Sensino translate it?
I am the Lord thy God who stirreth up the sea.
Okay.
The waves thereof.
Same thing. Stirs the sea. So according to the Malbim, the way you translate this pasuk, I am the Lord your God who calms the sea. Ve'yamu galav. And I'm also the ones who make the waves roar, make the noise. Hashem tzvakot shemo. I am the God of hosts. In other words, according to the Malbim, it's like I have the power to keep things quiet and I have the power to make things difficult. According to Rashi, I am this powerful God. I am the all-powerful God. Ve'asim devarai beficha. I'm going to put my words in your mouth. Uvitzel yadi kisiticha, and with the shadow of my hand, there is power. I will shelter you. I will cover you. Lintoa shamayim v'lisod aretz, to spread out the heavens and to found the earth. Rashi says, what do you mean? That I'm going to protect you so that you can spread out the heavens and found the earth. Rashi says this is a fulfillment of the promise about the Jewish people. We've been promised two different promises by God. We will be kafar haaretz. We will be like the sand of the land, and we will be like the stars of the heavens. And with all of those promises we had, and all the drushes that have been darshaned, because what's the difference between the two? It means there's a multitude of Jews that are going to occur. We're going to be a power in this world. God says, I'm going to make sure this happens. So this occurs. And this is, okay, according to the Malbim, one step even further. If it's necessary, I'm going to bring about the Geulah, even if I have to recreate the world itself. So, Vasim Dvarai Beficha, I'm going to put my words in your mouth. Of Itzel Yadid Kisiticha, I will protect you. Lintor Shemayim V'lisod Aretz. Says the Malbim, if I have to, I'm going to recreate the world. V'lemor L'tzion Amiata. And I'm going to say, to Tzion Ami Ata, that after all of this happens, I'm going to say, you are my nation. According to the Mitzvah David, this is not God saying that, V'lemor L'tzion, but rather it's going to be the non-Jews, after they see the redemption, are going to say to the Jewish people, to the B'nai Tzion, that they are the nation of God. Hit orari. So God now gets back to the Jews. He says, you told me, Uri. Let me tell you what you really have to do. Hit orari, awaken yourselves. You want me to wake up? You're the ones who aren't awake. Okay, and that's the Malbim's approach. Humi Yerushalayim. Rise up, Yerushalayim, asher shatit miyad Hashem et kos chamato. You've drunk the God's cup of anger. Et kubaat kos hatarela, the chalice of a cup of poison. In other words, what you've been doing, Jews, you have suffered the ultimate suffering, shatit matzit. You've drunk it and you've also drained it. You've been sucking on it. You finished it all off. Not only did you have, not only, the mitzit, Mitzvah Zion says mitzit is from the word mitzotz, okay, pacifiers, motzetz. You've sucked it all up. Unfortunately, you've suffered from all of these, even, to Rashi says, even, Hubat, according to Rashi, is the dregs at the bottom of the cup. You've suffered. Ein menahela mikol banim yalada. There's no one. You don't have a king. You don't have a shofet. That's the Ibn Ezra. There's no one to direct you. Okay, Rabbi Avigdor Belgansi says that after all of the troubles you've suffered, you don't have leadership anymore. The Radak says, okay, you went ahead in Galut, you didn't have anyone, Menahel, who was going to be able to help you out in all of this. Everyone, all of you were persecuted alike. No one's there to hold your hands. Okay, there are two things. Two things have happened to you. What are the two things? According to the Abarbanel, you've suffered two destructions of Batei Mikdash. According to Rashi, you've had a double measure of tsaros. Okay, according to Radak, what are the two things? Mi Yanudlach, who's going to move you? What are the double things? Hashod v'hashever. You have suffered from the shod and the shever, from plunder and from calamity, v'hara'av, and from hunger, and v'hacherev, and from the sword. Mi anachamech, who's going to be able to comfort you in this? Now, mi anudlach and mi anachamech, I like the bookends to this. Mi anudlach, the best translation I saw of this is from the Dat Mikra. According to the Ibn Ezra, according to the Ibn Ezra, mi anudlach is mi konenlach, who's going to mourn for you. Okay. According to the Dat Mikra, he says actually, who is going to mi yania rosho? Who's going to yanud? That's he's going to shake his head. Who's going to empathize with you? Okay, who's there to empathize? It's like banayich ulfu shachvu berosh kol chutzot. My children, my sons, have fainted. They are lying at the heads of all the streets. Kito michmar, like a captured bull, wild bull. Okay. Ibn Ezra says it's not a bull, it's a bird, but whatever it means, we go ahead and we're like caged animals. What's happened to us? Hamleim chamat Hashem garat Elokayach, who are filled with the fury of God, the yelling of their God. Therefore, lachein shimina zot aniyah. Therefore, listen to me, O poor ones. Vim Shechurat Ushchurat Velomiyain, who have been drunk, but not from wine. What do you mean drunk, but not from wine? Well, it says Rishwab, you're overwhelmed, okay, from all of your tzoros. Or the Marie Kras says he talks about the same metaphor we had. We had the cup of poison we had been drinking. That's what it means, shikur, not from wine, but we're shikur from this cup of poison that has caused us to suffer so. Ko amar Adonayich Hashem ve'elokayich yariv amo. Thus says your master Hashem. Okay, clear. The Barbanel says at the time of the Geulah, we will have God as our master. Now remember, what God said just a few psukim before was, there's no one, ein menahela, no one's leading us. The time of the Geulah, well, it's not really true. We don't have a human being leading us. We may not have leaders to do so, but we have a Kodesh Baruch Hu who's going to lead us. Velokayich yarivamo, God will fight our battles. Rashi says, Yadin dan dinamo. He's going to judge our battles, says the Shadal Shashem Ravit Rivimo. Same kind of concept. I'm going to take from you that cup of poison. I'm going to take it away. Et kubaat kos chamati, the chalice of the cup of my. V'lo tosifi lishtota od. You will not have to drink it any longer. V'samtia biyad mogayich. I'm going to take that cup, and I'm going to pass it off to those who have tormented you. Okay, the time of the Geulah, the Jews will no longer get that cup, the non-Jews will get it. And who are these people? Asher amru lenafshech shechi v'na'avora, who had told you, who had said about you, lie down, just give up, and we'll pass over you. V'tasimi cha'aretz gavech, and go ahead and put your, back to the grounds. V'chachutz la'ovrim, as if we are just a street, we're a path. They were trampling over us. We were just a path for these people. Those people are going to now get the punishment from HaKodesh Baruch. That's the parak. In broadest of terms, the opening of the parak is God's really, it's a good locker room speech. Okay, you're going to do it. You can do it. Look, I have the power. Second part of the parak is the Navi says to God, help us. And God says to the Jewish people, you can help yourselves, and then I will step in and solve the problems. We're going to stop right here. Next week, we will continue with the next parak, and we're getting close to the end. Of Yeshayahu, not to the end of the days. Thank you.